Hi, everyone. This is Mary Boo. I'm Assistant Director of NACAC, and I'm happy to welcome you to our webinar today on youth development and youth advocacy. Our presenters today are Nathan Ross, who happens to be in that picture there in the middle, and he is coordinator of NACAC's Community Champions Network project and has been doing youth advocacy and youth development for many years. The other presenter is Kim Stevens, who is director of NACAC's collaboration with Generations United and the National Foster Parent Association called Advocates for Families First. And Kim is also a longtime advocate for youth and has been doing youth speak out work for many, many years. And I'm very proud to have them both here today, and I think you'll enjoy the session very much. And Kim, if you switch to that next slide, I'm just going to let folks know a little bit about what's going on here today. All attendees are going to be in listen-only mode during the session, which means you can hear us, but we can't hear you or whatever might be going on in the background. If you have questions, what you do is type them in the box. You can see a control panel. You can see a control panel with a question that you can type in anytime, and then at the end of the session, I will ask those questions to Kim and Nathan. If you have any technical questions or other things you want to type to me, I will be paying attention to that box throughout the session. So just go ahead and type in there, and I will respond to you. And before I turn it over to them, I'm just going to say one other thing, that this webinar is brought to you by Community Champions Network, which is funded by Jockey Being Family, and we're very proud to have their support of this work. But I'm going to turn myself off and turn it over to Nathan and Kim.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nathan Ross, and I coordinate the Community Champions Network for NACAC. You see on this slide it says Community Champions Network and provides a little information about what we do. Community Champions Network really works to provide technical assistance in a variety of areas that help parents with post-adoption services and helping them build those post-adoption services, whether through support groups or other types of work they might see as beneficial to helping preserve families after the adoption process, and also works with youth development, which is what we'll be talking about today, and helping youth learn to use their voices and their stories to make positive changes throughout the system through a variety of ways, whether starting their own support groups or other services that they think are important for youth coming in to the foster care system or experiencing adoption. If there are any questions or if you're interested in any technical assistance, we'll provide that information at the end for you to get a hold of us, and we'd be more than happy to help with that. If we can get to the next slide.
Whoops. Hi, everybody. This is Kim Stevens. What you see right now is a link to a YouTube video of a PSA that the youth have done. When we're doing this training in person, Nathan and I love to share this video just because it's such a dramatic example of what youth can do. What we found with the webinars is that it's really hard to hear it, and the YouTube video itself is so large that it can sometimes crash our presentation altogether. But I want to give you a little bit of background about what happened with this video and why we're so excited about it. We had pulled together a group of youth in Ontario a few years ago, about 13 youth who had never met each other. They were between the ages of 11 and 18. And on Friday evening when they first got together, they started chatting and realized that between them, they had had a ridiculous number of moves. Then they started talking about how old they were when they were adopted and discovered that they had all been adopted as older kids. And they decided that they had some messages to share with folks in Ontario and really throughout both the U.S. and Canada about the small story about kids and care and what they need. On Saturday, they came together and put together a storyboard, and on Sunday, we videotaped their PSA, which is about 2 or 3 minutes long, sent it off to a professional who volunteered his time to make it look really fancy. And it has moved folks in Ontario, it's moved the ministry in Ontario to do a couple of things, one of which was to start concentrating on adoption for children that were older. Prior to this time, the ministry had believed that kids over the age of 2 or 3 were not adoptable. It turns out that almost every kid that we had at that meeting had been adopted, all but one had been adopted, and most of them had been adopted at the ages of 6 or 7 and older, all the way up to age 12. So that was an eye-opener for the ministry. The second thing was they decided that they needed to start doing universal subsidy for older kids if they really wanted to be serious about making sure older kids got adopted. So really quite exciting stuff, and I just want to point that spot to you so that you can look it up on your own time and see the video. It's excellent.
All right, so when looking at developing youth work, it's really important to focus on positive youth development. And so I'll just touch on a few of these steps right here that we're going to want to make sure to incorporate as we're looking to engage youth in any work that they're going to do. So we want to make sure that it's intentional and that the work that we're doing is really geared towards that positive youth development, helping them create a sense of worth in their work and whatever it is that they're trying to do, and that everything that we've planned and everything that we involve them in, again, goes back to positive development. How can we make it so that they have pride in what they're doing and that they can have pride in their story through the adoption or the foster care process, instead of just focusing on some of the negative and bad stories that have happened. We want to make sure that it's strengths-based. We want to make sure that a lot of youth that I've worked with, they say often that they're told they can't do this, or they're not good at this, or that they're on certain medications because of this and this, and so they really get a negative base about themselves and about their whole experience. And so when we're going to a strengths-based approach, we're helping them, again, see that positive stuff, seeing how some of those challenges, can be used as opportunities for growth, and always making sure that our language reflects that for our youth. And we want to make sure that we're building that capacity, building their ability to go forward and continue in whatever kind of development they're doing and whatever work that they are doing, again, so that it's strengths-based and so that they have a sense of self-worth. We want to make sure that the work is relevant, not only relevant for our own agendas or what we think that youth want, but relevant to what our youth are saying that they want. So especially as we're going, and we talk later about advocacy agendas and different things like that, sometimes as professionals we kind of think, oh, these are the things that need to be changed in the system, and we just want our youth to kind of parrot that and to be the champions of the things that we identify. And so we really want to make sure that we've talked with our youth and that we've asked them, are the agenda items things that are relevant for you? Are the programs and services that are offered relevant to you? Would you benefit from a peer-to-peer mentoring service? Would you benefit from specialized tutoring services? Or are those things that are just beneficial to us? And we want to make sure that it's respectful. We want to make sure that when we're bringing youth in and that when we're doing any type of youth work, that we're acknowledging our youth as actual members of this work, and not just little kids who need to be shuffled through the system until they get to a certain age, but that they have a say, and that their say is important and valuable, and that we should respect what they're saying, and we should implement the recommendations that our youth give us. And you see here that there are 8 keys of positive youth development that are identified here. We want to make sure that it's physically and emotionally safe for our youth. And that's, a simple way of doing that is just establishing those boundaries at the very first meeting that you have with your youth. Setting up those ground rules so that everyone can contribute to the ground rules, and so that everyone knows their expectations, and so that they know that it's going to be a safe environment. So simple things from when is it appropriate to hug, or what kind of hugs, and different things like that. And acknowledging that the conversations that happen in the room stay in the room as long as they don't cause a potential of danger for the person or for other peers. So that's really important, and it provides that stability that youth might not have had prior to coming into care, and so it's something that can be very important for them. We want to make sure that there is belonging ownership, and again, this goes back to being respectful of our youth. And so any work that they are involved in, again, it's not just they are getting the service, it's not just getting the service, but it's the taking ownership of that service. So they get to help create what that peer-to-peer mentoring program looks like, or they get to help create what that youth speak out team looks like. And so it helps our youth keep coming back. When they have ownership of those services and of those programs, they're much more engaged, and they're much more likely to recommend whatever it is that they're doing to other peers who might benefit from it. And again, as I've mentioned before, we want to make sure that their self-worth, that they're able to see that they are capable of doing great things in the world, and that no matter what negative stereotypes they've been labeled with in the past, they have the ability to overcome those, and they're in a group that is going to help make sure that they're bringing out the best in themselves, and that they feel like they are worthy of doing whatever it is they've set their mind to. It's really important to allow self-discovery in any kind of positive youth development work. Again, it goes back to, in the professional sense, we kind of have to step back and allow our youth to make some of the mistakes and some of the things that come just from living life. And it allows them to see, okay, these are the choices that I made, and that I have to live with the natural consequences, whether good or bad, that come from it. Again, it builds on that self-worth and gives them ownership of whatever it is that they're doing. We want to increase the quality of positive relationships that our youth have with peers and with adults. Oftentimes, for whatever reason, whatever setting they come from, they might not have built on positive relationships with peers or adults. They might be nervous about, especially when it comes to adults, building those relationships because of the different standards and things that are put in the system, where professionals kind of have to step back and aren't able to connect wholly with the youth. And so having any type of youth work, it's going to be really important that we kind of try to get rid of those barriers that we put up in a certain sense, and that we're building those quality relationships where the youth feel like they can come and that they can be safe, and that they have someone that they can talk to, and someone who is going to genuinely listen to them and value the things that they're saying. We're going to discuss conflicting values allowing youth to discuss conflicting values and form their own is something that's very important. Again, going back to that self-discovery and things like that. So not just saying this is how the world works and this is how you should think or this is what you should feel about it, but letting the youth say this is what I believe, and hearing other people's beliefs, and then being able to say, okay, I will either adapt and adopt that belief, or I'm just going to stick with my own because of the facts that I've learned through this work. So all of these different things are very important, and you want to continue to, as you move forward in any type of youth work, to go back to these and check to see if the work that you're doing and the progress that you're making, if it's reflecting these 8 keys of positive youth development. And if not, try looking at how can we incorporate these? How can we incorporate discovery if we find that our work isn't doing that? Okay, and can we move on to the next one?
Yeah. So just a little bit of background. I've been doing these youth groups, youth empowerment and youth advocacy speak out groups since about 1997. And when I started with young people that I knew and young people that colleagues of mine knew, so that there was a sense of trust and a sense of, I guess, a sense of calmness about the whole thing. One of the things that we heard a lot in the beginning of empowering youth to speak on their own behalf was that we didn't want to stir things up. We didn't want to get kids upset. We didn't want to cause issues where other adults had thought that issues were not there. And in fact, what we really knew, those of us that kept pushing forward to do these kinds of youth speak out groups, was that kids may be presenting on the outside like everything was fine, like they had somehow miraculously moved past their trauma and moved past their experience. But really what we know, we're smarter than that. What we know is that kids carry their experiences with them. And at some point in time, we also heard from folks that we couldn't be bringing youth together unless we had clinical people on staff being paid huge amounts of money all the time, so that as their trauma was being poked at and as they were acting out, there would be somebody there to contain it. Here's what we found out instead. We found out that doing these kinds of youth groups, these speak out and advocacy teams, actually was a subtle form of therapy, and that the youth, by the very virtue of being in the same room with other young people who might have had similar experiences, or who at the very least had the experience of not growing up with birth mom or birth dad, had a level of acceptance and understanding for each other that each one of those youth individually had not felt before. And what we also started to see was that youth were beginning to heal from some of their trauma experiences. A lot of that around the fact that they had achieved commonality, that they were taking part in something that was meaningful to them, and that they could move on with their lives, in fact. I'm sorry, I skipped a slide. The other piece of this is this idea of bearing witness to what we have experienced. Judith Herman in this book, Trauma and Recovery, just had some remarkable and really groundbreaking discoveries at that point in time. She wrote her book in the late 80s, I believe. And what she was discovering, talking to both children and youth that had grown up with some pretty horrific experiences, but also talking to folks that had been through war, had been through natural disasters, had been through other devastations, was that one of the most important pieces to not just surviving a trauma, but healing from that trauma and growing and moving on, was this idea of discovering meaning in their experience that could transcend the limits of the personal tragedy and join with others in social action. And those pieces are exactly what happens when we do our Youth Speak Out, youth networking work and youth advocacy work. We've seen some remarkable results.
And so we see here why start a youth support group. And again, we talked about positive youth development, and you see it highlighted here. And one of the things to point out with this is that you really are going to want to talk with your youth about how they want to label whatever it is that they're doing. A lot of youth kind of shy away from anything that has support into it because not because they don't feel like support is important, but because they are put into so many different programs and so many different things that are talk about the support, but don't actually ask what they want, that they just feel like anything that says support is going to be another therapy session where they're more talked at than actually have involvement with anything. And so sometimes we just call them youth groups or whatever it is that our youth want to label it, but it generally all gets back to the fact that it's supporting our youth in one way or another. And so we see here that one of the reasons why it is so important to have those youth groups is for that opportunity of positive development that we talked about. I have found in the various youth work that I have done, and it's amazing every time I go and start a youth speak out team or go and witness one coming forward, the friendships that are forged from those groups. It's almost like everyone is some long lost brother or sister to one another, and when they come together, there is just this great sense of community, this great sense of just being related to one another through sort of similar experiences. And so having those groups, having a place where youth can just go and be with other peers who have similar experiences and just be. There aren't specific agendas all the time. We're not trying to fix them in some way. They're just able to be and get out of whatever the service is that they want, or whatever the group is that they want. It can be very rewarding for our youth, and it's very rewarding for the professionals and the support staff that are there to witness it. We've seen just amazing amounts of growth come out of having these groups here. As Kim talked about with the subtle therapy, I know that for myself as an adopted person, I got to a certain point where I plateaued in my therapy. I didn't want to do therapy anymore. I didn't want to talk about my story anymore. But when I started speaking out, and especially when I started connecting with other youth, I kind of got that subtle part of the therapy. I got to experience the relief and acknowledge different things that I had kind of buried away from myself with my story, and got to own them, and got to be proud of some things and understand other things, and just got to get I had validation because I had other people who understood and who supported me. So it's very important, and I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have supports like that in my life. It's an advocacy group for system reform. Youth have the best capacity for making changes, in my opinion, for making changes within the system. It's much harder for anyone to deny the stories of youth when they say these experiences affected me in this way, or I wish that this had been done differently because it would have helped me in this way. So allowing youth to be united and to work for themselves and for other youth is very empowering, not only for themselves, but in your community. So whether that's provincially or statewide, or federally, having that ability to do advocacy work for youth to, again, get that ownership of their story and be unified with other stories, and to say, these are the things that we want to see changed. We want to make sure that we stay with our siblings, or if at the very least, if we can't stay with them, we want to make sure that we have the right to go and see them on their birthdays, or we want to make sure that we have the right to see them and spend weekends with them and spend important holidays with them and things like that. Those types of things come from having those unified groups, having those unified places where youth who might not want to speak out but still feel that that's important can go and share their story with someone who will champion that for them, another peer who will champion that for them. And lastly, we see the healing and growth part, which I just touched on a little bit as well. There's so much healing that comes from being around people who have or so.
Nathan, are you there? I can't hear you. Kim?
It shows what you get in those groups. It just allows for people who, before they came to this, you wouldn't be able to pick each other out of a crowd, but by the end of it, it's like they had known each other their whole lives, and they just feel like that group was built for them, and really they can connect and have ownership of it. I mean, it says here, youth and young adults who have experience in foster care, adoption, or kin care. So it's not just, those who are just in foster care or those who have just been adopted. Everyone through the entire realm of the child welfare system can find belonging in those youth groups, can find those shared, varied experiences through the different stages of the child welfare system. And they get to be included in something. They get to be a part of something that they don't have to try out for, that there aren't dues, or it's not you have to come to a certain amount of meetings or you're kicked out. It's you come as you are wherever you are. And if you need to take a step back to deal with your own personal issues, you can do that, and you're always welcome back here. You're never going to be excluded as long as you're being physically and emotionally safe for the rest of the group. Okay. And so we see, where are the youth? Often when, as professionals, this idea of what we want to do, but we don't know how to bring the youth in. Where do we go? Where do we get them from? So here we see just a list of ideas for different things that you can do. Most of us, if we have a passion for youth work, we know youth of some kind. The first Youth Speak Out team that I started had two of my siblings on the group, and a coworker of mine who was connected to a state child welfare agency was able to recommend two other people. So it started with just 4 young people who I knew personally, or my coworker knew personally, that we had come to the group, and from there we were able to say, okay, we were able to establish a foundation, and then we were able to send out a newsletter and an email to all of our contacts and the contacts of other coworkers, and we were able to bring in more youth from that. So starting with people and it's okay to have a small group. It's okay to start with just a couple of people. It will grow as you continue to offer that support or that system for your youth. Youth and parent support groups. Parent support groups are a great avenue for finding that youth work, especially if you're working in the adoption, post-adoption, kinship types things. It also allows for helping to create a schedule for your youth when you're able to say, okay, we're going to meet at the same time as the parent support meets. They can it creates a way for parents to bring in their youth and have the youth get something out of that time instead of just feeling like there's babysitting going on. Post-adoption centers, residential facilities are really good, and I think they're often overlooked. I think people get scared of residential facilities, and they think, well, the young people or the kids that are in this are kids who are beyond hope or might think different negative perceptions. And really, some of the richest information that I've gotten, or the most insightful information I've gotten, have been from youth who have experienced residential treatment. Youth who can say that from their experiences they wish these things had happened, or they know these types of supports are necessary. So definitely look into those residential facilities in your community and see how you can engage those youth in some of that positive development, because it could be that point, if they are there for mental health reasons, it could be that avenue that helps them to bridge that gap and to start that healing process if they're kind of stuck in that. And then one of the last things that I'll point out from this is audiences. Whenever you're going and talking to other professionals about youth work, if you're going to a conference of some kind, speaking to people and saying, you know, that this service is what you offer, or this is an opportunity for youth, can really get you some good contacts and some good leads on different youth that you can engage in creating that youth development work.
So one of the things, oh, actually, this is you, Nathan. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're okay.
Yeah. One of the things that that we started when we very first in Massachusetts at the Mass for Kids Youth Speak Out team, we had looked around and we saw that there were some youth advisory boards in our state, and there were some in other states as well. And what we observed was that with those particular advisory boards, they were almost exclusively young people who were doing quite well, young people who had made an application. They were the folks that, you know, they were the folks that, frankly, we want all of our youth to look like, you know, put together, going along with the program, not causing a lot of trouble. But we felt very strongly, and we continue to believe, Nathan and myself and all of us that do this work, we continue to believe that those youth who are struggling are the ones who are best going to show us the way to make a system that's better for all of the kids. So we're very clear that our youth groups should not be exclusive. We, as Nathan had suggested, we're not at all rigid about membership. The philosophy that we have is once you're a member, you're always a member. If we have young people that come to us and say, you know, another group has asked me to be part of theirs, we're very happy to say, absolutely, you are part of whatever groups you want to be part of. You don't have to choose. We're not going to put you in that loyalty and that choice position. You can be part of our group for the rest of your life as you want to be. We don't use them as therapy, even though there is some subtle therapy that does happen, even though there's some therapeutic use to them. We don't use them as therapy, and we would never do that to kids to try to trick them into therapy that way. And finally, it's incredibly important not to use the youth speakers to promote adult agendas. Now, it can be that the youth speakers are supporting an adult agenda, but only if that's an agenda that they also believe in. And one thing that we have had, not too often, but occasionally, we've had folks come to us and ask, can your panel come and speak about, well, one of the most glaring things that I can remember is a group had wanted us to have a young person panel, a youth panel, come and speak about the importance of increasing adoption subsidy and foster care stipends. And we said, no, that's just not going to happen, because for young people, those stipends and those subsidies can feel as though somebody is being paid to care about them. And we're not going to do anything that's going to support that sort of negative feeling about themselves, that nobody could love them without being paid. What we do is we go to the youth, we ask them what their agenda items are, and then as adult supporters, we help find them the venues to speak on those items. Getting started can be really tough, but it's also just as simple as you want to make it. The very first Youth Speak Out group that I had started back in Massachusetts in '97, essentially what we did was we asked a bunch of youth to come together, and we said, hey, we're wondering if you ever thought that you could do a better job than the social workers, than the administration, than the legislators, than your parents, or even than you've already done. Do you think that you have some information that you could share with adults, with decision makers, and with other youth that could help them do a better job. And pretty much universally, young people say, yes, absolutely, I've got better ideas. So obviously, we're going to first play to their sense of wanting to be in charge, wanting to take control of their lives again, because the first thing we know about coming into care is that that is about the most powerless that any young person is ever going to be. We want to sit down and we want to together as partners, adult and youth together, figure out what are our purposes and goals. We need to find strong adult leadership, but also we need to have youth leadership in that as well. The youth need to be involved from the very, very beginning. The youth also deserve and need to have the proper training and preparation. We don't want to put young people out there and have them flounder for their words. We don't want them to reveal things about themselves that shouldn't be revealed and that might be dangerous to be revealed. We have been able to, in the past, secure help from folks from the Dale Carnegie Institute on public speaking. We've been able to get some of the United Way Speakers Bureau folks to come in. And we also have the youth themselves provide training and preparation with each other. And one of the things that I feel really strongly about is that you should never wait until you have a secure team in order to say you have a team. I'm very firmly in the if you build it, they will come camp. And I can tell you that with all of the teams that we've ever started, we bring the youth together, and in that first meeting, we have a number of different events that they can take part in. We've already identified them, and we've identified them by telling the folks that are hosting events that we have a young person team for them. We have a youth panel for them. Now, of course, that's a leap of faith, and I know that not everybody's comfortable with those kinds of leaps of faith, but I'm telling you, it's never backfired on us yet. And the thing about it is that if you tell the young people there's a place for them to speak their mind and share their incredible experience, they are going to be much more likely to sign on and to be ready to go to work right away. And then finally, one of the things that we always want to do is keep going back. Figure out how to make it better, figure out how to improve it, and always, always, always keep up that enthusiasm and that excitement.
So when you're looking at developing youth work, oh, no, you're okay. You might think, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the things? Or maybe you already have a youth group up and you faced some of these challenges. So I'm going to, again, just touch on a few of these things. Transportation has been one of the biggest issues that I've faced with doing different youth groups. What you find is that you want to include all of the youth, and you have, you say in your group, your informal policies that everyone's welcome no matter what. Well, then you have youth from all over your city or your community who want to come, but they don't necessarily have rides. Either if they're in foster care, they might have a worker who isn't able to bring them, or if they're in residential, there's different hoops that have to be jumped through, or their parents aren't able to get off work, or different things like that. And so having transportation ready for youth can be one of the biggest challenges, and can kind of cut the group a little short if it's not dealt with properly. And so it's finding, on the professional side, finding your own support team that can help you with the transportation can go a long way in helping to make sure that you don't burn out and that your youth are able to keep coming as long and as often as they want to. Scheduling, again, can be really challenging, because when you have multiple people with various life things going on and you're trying to get them together for one day, it can be really hard. So one of the things that I've found to be beneficial is to try to plan out your schedule as much as possible, and as far advanced as possible. And as Kim talked about, having those opportunities for advocacy identified already before the first group even starts, it can be very helpful for the youth, because it helps them to place those times on hold so that they don't schedule anything else around them. And then you're able to have at least those times identified for the whole youth group to get together. And then doing that, in those first couple of meetings, setting it out 2 or 3 months ahead of time for your meetings can go a long way in helping make sure that everyone's able to come, and it can also help you with the transportation issue. You'll know ahead of time how many youth you can expect to come and how to find different transportation as needed for that. Funding can be challenging. It depends on the different type of the youth work that you're doing. If it's advocacy, a lot of the things that you're going to do, a lot of your money is going to go towards the transportation and trying to having food and different things that you're going to want to definitely have at your groups. Youth will disengage. It's happened. Happens almost every time you get youth together. If there's no food or anything, they kind of check out. But your money will really go towards that. One of the things that we have that we try to always encourage when we're doing advocacy, especially if our youth are going to speak, is to try to get some kind of stipend to help the youth with their time. We as professionals, if we do this as our job, so that we can afford to keep our lights on and things like that. And so we want to give our youth the same courtesy and acknowledge them as professionals, and that's one way to do that. There are different grants that you can write for depending on the type of work that you're doing for youth. There are positive youth development grants that are available, and there are ways to connect with state agencies or state dollars depending on the type of youth work you're doing. Once you're able to show that the work is having positive effects on the youth. And so it gets a little tricky sometimes, though, in that realm, because you might have to focus on that subtle therapy aspect or other things like that. And so it can cross maybe some of the your kind of internal conflict, as you don't want to use the groups as therapy, but it might be some of the avenues that you can explore for funding. And so that's conversations you're going to want to have internally, and also just kind of see where your group is at and what works best in that. If you don't have staff support, again, if you're the one person running the group, which often happens with youth groups, it can get overwhelming for you, and the burnout, there's a chance for burnout from that. And so you want to make sure, again, that you create those support systems for yourself the same as you're going to create for your youth, so that if it becomes too much or overwhelming, especially when you're thinking of scheduling and transportation, try to find funding and trying to help train the youth, all of those things, you want to, if you can have those support systems, it can help make sure that you're providing the most effective service possible, and you can be the most effective support possible to the youth, so that work continues for them.
Nathan, I just want to jump in here and add one other piece about the system reform, this persistence amid resistance. The folks that have been at this for a long time, some of the older adults that have been at this work for a long time, are very familiar with the fact that you take maybe 3 or 4 steps forward and you might take 2 or 3 steps back, and you have to keep plugging away. Joe Kroll and I, our director, were both at a training session this past week, and one of the pieces of legislative advocacy that Joe has been working on for 21 years just finally went through this past month. Another person in the room had been working on opening up birth certificates in Ohio for 26 years, and that just finally passed last year. And we know that for our youth, it can be really frustrating to work so hard and feel like you've gotten somewhere, and then all of a sudden the world falls out from underneath you. I can tell you folks that in Massachusetts several years back, we had a group of advocates, young advocates, who had managed to get the state legislature to commit to taking down all of those Adopt a Highway signs. They had an incredible campaign. They did some public awareness events. They ended up on the front page of the newspaper. They talked to the legislators, and they finally got to the Transportation Committee. And the Transportation Committee made a commitment to them to take down the signs over time and change them from Adopt a Highway to Sponsor a Highway. Well, the following year, we all started noticing that signs were being changed, but that language, Adopt a Highway, continued to be on the signs. And we went back to the Transportation Committee and found that it was a new chairperson who very disrespectfully told our youth, listen, I'm not the guy that made that commitment, and I'm not going to follow through. So I say that only for the adult facilitators and adult supporters to remember to just watch out for those things and be sure to, I guess, hold the hope for the youth when those kinds of things happen. let them know that sometimes it is a long battle, but that in fact every step that they make, every time that they speak, it is all contributing to a bigger picture down the road. But sometimes we have to be prepared to hold our youth when they have yet another disappointment, and we've got to help them find the strength to keep going on. Or we need to help them find a way to make meaning if that's not something that they can keep doing.
Yes, absolutely. I
Can you
know
give
one of the things that we've done when it comes to identifying those things that are going to take a long time to go through is also try to find those low-hanging fruit items as well. So identifying those things that might be able to go through more quickly, so that our youth don't, just their first thing out the gate is, stuck into a 26-year battle before it gets through, because we don't want our youth to check out, after the first thing, and we don't, they're not going to, yeah, they're not going to see 26 years ahead of time. They're not going to see that. So I'm finding those small things. One of the things that the Missouri team did was try to work on a Missouri State Bill of Rights for children coming into care, that didn't require additional dollars, but was just really making sure that things that were in policy were legally bound to being done as well. And so that's one of the things that they've worked on, and they've gone and talked in front of the legislators in Missouri to help get that passed. And it looks like that's that it's going to go through relatively quickly. And I say relatively because it's still politics, so there's that. But it isn't going to be as big of an uphill battle, because everyone can get around basic human rights, especially if they don't cost any dollars. So identifying some of those low-hanging things can sometimes take a little bit of that burden off of the more challenging issues that you want to get past. And so we see here the activities, what kind of activities can be done, or the different training and preparation. Skill building, you're going to want to make sure that before you send youth out to do any kind of advocacy work, that they have had opportunities to practice. Sometimes you'll get a call that from someone that says, hey, I want, can so-and-so, I heard them speak at this thing and I want them to come and speak for my group. And you'll find that the same story can be used in different ways for different groups. And so while one youth has talked about the effects that therapy had on him, he only slightly touched on the education piece. And so you might get a call from someone wanting them to talk on education, and your youth agrees to this but has not actually practiced on it. And so you don't want to send that youth out there and then they're, as Kim was saying earlier, floundering for their words, trying to figure out what it is they want to talk about with education, how their story wraps around education. So giving them those opportunities to practice using that same story and crafting it in different ways is very beneficial. And you also see here creative expression. Not every person that wants to tell their story wants to tell it in an oratory way, like for me, that is my niche. I can do it that way. Some prefer to sing or dance or use art, and they still have effective and powerful stories to tell. So you want to make sure that as you're training and preparing them, that you're incorporating them into how they want to tell their story and helping them figure out how what the best way to do that is. Annual retreats are great opportunities to have youth come back together, especially if you get to having a big group and not everyone is able to make it to every meeting. Identifying those annual retreats towards the end of your year can help everyone set their calendar so that you can come together and talk about what you've done over the year and identify agenda items for your next year going into it, and also just a way for everyone to connect and kind of have some fun together. See the social connections right above that, building on that friendship and that belonging that we've talked about earlier. And this can be really important. Doing research and response work is another activity that you can do with your youth in your groups. Connecting them with, if you know of agencies that also do research on different things that are important for the child welfare system, having youth engage in that, it's another way to give them ownership, and it's another way to help them understand the kind of professional side of the child welfare system to understand what policies are out there, to understand how those are supposed to be implemented, so that when they go and tell their stories, they have data that they can use to back it up with, that helps engage that other side of the room. Everyone's going to be bound to those stories, but when you can add those pieces of data as well, it can really help. And it can also help craft their stories for the next year and for moving forward. Product development, creating those newsletters, videos, different PSAs, it can be very effective, and it goes back to that creative expression that we just talked about. Having multiple ways of youth get out there and to use their story or to express themselves. It just keeps them engaged and gives them, again, that sense of ownership, and helps them to want to keep coming back, want to do more, and to also encourage their peers to come into the group as well.
So I'm just going to quickly go through this. This webinar and all of the handouts will be up online, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. But this is a sample of the newsletters that when we're launching a team or when we're having a meeting with a group of young people, either Nathan or myself or one of the other adults in the room will keep track of what's happening. We'll be taking pictures of flip chart information that's been put up there. We'll have the youth go through and talk about what some of their messages are. The youth will make their own artwork. We ask them to make lists like what makes a good worker, what makes a good parent. We have, you'll see on here, we've got some upcoming events that we put into the newsletter. We take some of the things that they've written, songs and poetry, and put those in the newsletter. And then we always include a picture of the group with their permission. Excuse me, the nice piece about doing it this way, pardon me, is that the youth have a document. They have something tangible that really documents what they did together and helps them stay connected. And it's also a tool that they can use as they're trying to educate people, because you know, one of their real commitments, the young people that come forward to do the Youth Speak Out work, is that they do want to connect people to their ideas, to their issues, and to making the system a better place for other youth to come. These newsletters also work as a wonderful recruitment tool when young people are going forward and inviting others to be in their group. This picture that you see here is of a group in Massachusetts called the HEROES Group, and HEROES stands for Helping Everyone Receive Our Everyday Stories. So this was from the first time that we got together, and this group, you'll see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 adults, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 youth. The group has now got probably the same 6 adults are involved in it, but the young people have grown to a group of about 30, and that's the kind of growth that we want to see. It's very exciting when that happens. Then these are just some of the events that Youth Speak Out groups and youth networking and the HEROES group have done over the years. Some of the places where they've done conferences and trainings, they have trained judges and therapists, teachers and doctors, social workers. They've done a number of legislative events. They have been very significant in helping to direct the way that legislation gets filed. And I know in Massachusetts, for example, when the Adoption and Safe Families Act was passed, Massachusetts was all set to start building Boys Town type of residential treatment centers because they felt that we had too great a lack of foster parents available in order to meet the need. Well, we had 35 young people come and say, we don't want to be in warehouses. We want to be in families. And the committee immediately changed. From that testimony, the committee immediately changed their direction and started looking at ways to do waivers and to do other things so that we could have enough foster families, kinship families, adoptive families for these young people. They also, as Nathan has said, they've done things around passing a Bill of Rights. I know the Iowa team has passed a number of pieces of legislation, and in fact even helped Senator Grassley from Iowa look at some federal legislation that was going to make things very different and very much better for kids across the nation. So this is just to give you some ideas of what you can do.
Oh, and Kim, real quick,
Yeah.
when we're looking at the different types of conferences and trainings, one of the things that is important when we're training our youth is to um, kind of prepare them on the different types of questions that they might be asked at these types of things, and to help them
Absolutely.
understand when it's okay to say that they aren't comfortable answering something. That's really important, and because it has never failed that any time that we're having a training, adults, they're not, they mean well, but sometimes the questions just come out in a way that makes your hair stand up, and so having the youth trained to say, hey, I'm sorry that I'm not comfortable answering that question, or things like that, it can really help them so that they don't feel like they have to share more than they're ready to. And it's also appropriate, very much appropriate, as the supporter or the facilitator to just establish some ground rules at these different events for the audience so that they know what the expectations are. And again, it helps provide that safety and stability for your youth.
Thank you, Nathan. That was a really important point. I'm glad you brought it up. I also just want to point your attention to the lower right-hand corner. Don't forget to have fun. They want to have fun too. So we always have made sure that we intersperse all of this incredibly important hard work and advocacy with fun.
Yes.
So Nathan, is this me or you?
It's you.
This is me. Sorry about that, folks.
No, you're fine.
So these are just some of the messages and themes that the young people have identified that they do want to talk about. The importance of family connections is huge, and I'd say probably the most important family connection that our youth talk about all the time is to stay connected to siblings. I cannot tell you the number of times I've heard with tears in their eyes a young man or a young woman say, I was told that after my little brother and sister were adopted that I would be able to stay connected to them, and then the adoptive family changed their mind, and I haven't seen them in 7 years. I haven't seen them in 10 years. I don't know where they are. That is one of the most devastating losses that a young person can experience, and not just for the young people that we're hearing from, but I am sure for those brothers and sisters that are left behind as well. Race and culture in adoption is another huge issue. I don't think that we can really understand what it's like to be different in the world without listening to someone who has felt that difference in the world. And one of the things that's been very clear and very instructive for us adults, I'm an adoptive parent myself, is to hear young people talk about the change in, I'm so sorry about that. Nathan, can you talk a little bit while I wait for this man to fix his car?
Absolutely. And so I'm not sure what Kim was going to say about the race and culture piece, but again, it is one of the more prevalent discussions or messages that comes up when youth are trying to identify things to talk about, especially when we're looking at multiracial or mixed families, blended families, different things like that. It's important for our youth to it's not just negative stuff, but how to embrace the culture of someone else. And, they want to learn how to do it, and they want their families and others to know how to help integrate them into the family. One of the things that's talked about.
Thank you, Nathan. He appears to have gotten control.
Okay.
Just for the audience to understand, I'm at a hospital right now. One of my kids is in the hospital, and you're all foster adoptive kinship people. You understand. The one thing that I did want to say about that, Nathan, is, and again, reflecting back on my experience watching my own children grow up, a lot of the issues around race and culture don't come out until our kids are older and they're out in the world on their own, whether it's because they've gone off to university or they're just out in the community. And kids who are doing really fine in loving, warm, accepting, protective families get out into the community and start having some real challenging experiences with being seen as different when they've always felt as though they were the same. So it's good to hear from those people who've experienced it personally to help us adults know the best way to support them with that. And then the other pieces, openness, transitions, and moves is huge. Adolescence and aging out and permanence, and just even finding your way through identity in general. Very important pieces around what our young people share with us and with each other.
Oh, Kim, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
For race and culture, one of the things, this also works well as a topic for your youth group. As Kim said, a lot of this doesn't come up until our youth get older and are, getting out into the world. So having a place where they can come back and just talk to other people who might have experienced it can really help them with their family life. So not only them talking to other people about it, but just them getting feedback from someone else. It can be really important, really helpful, so that it kind of limits the rifts in the family. I know that I've met a lot of youth who have talked about the issue of race and culture, and they just want someone to help that can understand them, to help them figure out how they approach it with their family. How do you talk to your parent who you love and say that they're not honoring your culture in a way that doesn't make them feel like they're bad parents and things like that. So it can be a very important topic in your youth groups.
Thanks, Nathan. That is a huge piece. So when I think about what the adults provide for the young people, these are really the 5 most important things. Physical and psychological safety, just in terms of having a good place for people to be, a welcoming environment, a youth-friendly environment for the youth to meet in. Psychological safety in terms of some of the things that Nathan was talking about regarding preparing our young people to speak, but also preparing our young people to say, no, I don't have to answer that question, or to say, really, that's not an appropriate approach to what we're talking about. And for us to sometimes step in as that shield. We've seen oftentimes physically wanting to step in as a shield. When a young person gets up on a panel and talks about their deep, deep need and desire to have a family and to have a place to belong, it's pretty much a universal response for caring folks in the audience to want to jump up and put their arms around them and say, I'd love to be there for you. That can be almost as damaging as not doing that. To have some stranger jump out of a crowd and come up and say, oh, I'll take you home with me, or I'll adopt you, out of the blue, it's not the response that our young people are looking for. And we, as whether we're adult leaders or whether we are also youth as well, but are in the place of a facilitator, we're going to do that for the young person. We're going to step in for them. We want to provide structure for them so that they know what's expected, what they can expect. And again, another two-way street. We're there to also model supportive relationships from adults, and relationships to them and with them, as well as relationships with one another, that they can watch. What does it look like when people get along, and what does it look like when people argue and disagree, and how do they get through that without having a relationship fall apart? Because for some of our young people, anytime there was a disagreement, there was a transition that came right after that. I just was talking with somebody last week again, a young man who grew up in care and then was adopted at 23 and now works in the state child welfare system. And he was saying that one of the most difficult things for some of the young people he knows is that they'd never experienced adults argue and then resolve their arguing. And it was a real eye-opener for me to think about it that way, that there are a lot of just sort of expected experiences that we think young people will have growing up that they don't. So that role modeling is huge as well. And then finally, opportunities to belong, this sense of inclusion, this sense that you are accepted, whoever you are, and while you are figuring out who that person is, we are going to love you and we're going to accept you for the person that you are and the person that you want to become. We also, one of the things that's not on here that we need to add is adult leaders also provide stepping stones for our young people. We have a role and a position and an ability to help them get into internships, to help them get into school, to write reference letters for them, to do whatever we can to give them that step up to get where they're wanting to go. And we really have to embrace that responsibility and take it on. And then this is a quote actually from one of the first young people that got involved in the Speak Out team with us. We were trying to come up with a mission statement, and Josh wrote this: when adults in power make decisions about children who have been adopted or in care, they need to involve us, those who have personally experienced it. I'd say that was written in '97. I think all of us have evolved, and I've got to find Josh because I want to rewrite this to say, not they need to involve us, but they need to make a place for us to lead the decision making. The youth need to not just be involved; they need to be able to lead.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I was just reminded of as you were talking about that, that is going to be just as important when we're working with our youth, especially on telling their stories, is that after they have events where they talk to people, it is very important that there's time for them to debrief, that there is a safe space for them to come back and talk about how it was. I know for me, I've shared my story for 8 years now, and there are still times where I remember things that I didn't even know I'd forgotten until I'm telling my story. And I've told the same story so many times, but there are still parts that I remember. And so having people that I can go back and just say, whoa, that caught me off guard, and talk to really makes it helpful for me to be able to continue to do this. And so just as something for you all to look into as you're preparing your youth for speaking opportunities, is to make sure to set that time aside to say, what was this like? How can we help you? Or do you just want to sit here in silence? And also, it helps address those things that come up, those well-meaning people who come up and say, "Hey, I want to adopt you," and things like that. As the facilitator, as their supporter, kind of taking that step in and saying, setting those boundaries and saying, while we appreciate, everyone's intentions of, wanting to connect with these young people, here are some of the boundaries that we have in place. Don't rush the young people. Don't give them your card and tell them to call you. Different things like that, as it is appropriate for your group. So wrap this up real quick. We see evolution of the youth groups go from youth share their stories to promote changes, increase in well-being and efficacy for members, educational vocational opportunities, youth and adults as partners. If we go to the next one, you really get kind of that real idea of the evolution that these groups usually take. I'm going to, right here, you see that they start out as just participants. They might come and they're not ready to share their story. They have an idea of what they want to do, or they're kind of just there because their mom or dad told them that they had to go. But as they start coming back and are engaging with more peers, they start, actually engaging, and then they become students who want to learn and who start practicing some of the skills. And then as they get more comfortable, they start teaching the newcomers. And they start teaching while still learning, and trying to help put some of their learning into practice by helping new people come in. And then eventually they get to a point where they're masters. They're masters of the group. They're masters of their story, of learning how to craft their story, of learning how to tell their story, and they're able to wholly lead the group with support of other peers. And so that's what we want to see. We want to see our youth get to a point where they aren't just participants, but where they are, as Kim was saying, leading the discussions, that they're in a place where they feel confident in leading those discussions because they know that they have the knowledge that they need and that they have the supports necessary to make the statements that they do. And so here is the contact information. We're going to open it up for questions, and so I just want to give you this contact information, and then we'll give it again at the end. This is my information and Kim's information. If you have any questions about youth work along the way, it's part of the technical assistance that Community Champions Networks offers and is helping youth groups get started and helping you navigate how to do that. So feel free to give me a call or email me anytime. I'm definitely here to help and look forward to doing any of that. I want to turn over and see, do we have any questions, Mary, from the audience? That
We sure do, Nathan. Thank you both so much. I get to listen to you. I don't get to listen to you train as often as I'd like. I really enjoyed today. So if other people have questions, I have several here, but now's a good time to type them in. The first is someone who has youth who've been on panels and testified before legislators But they have a problem with foster parents not always helping make the youth available, and wondered if you all had suggestions on that piece of it.
Kim, I was wondering if you yep, there you go.
Nathan, do you have suggestions?
No, I was going to let you go first, especially as a parent, to see what.
Yeah. So one of the things that when we were starting our group and even moving forward over the years, we really try to impress upon the parents that these kinds of groups can be very, very helpful for their children. You know, it's always the what's in it for me. We impress upon them that if the kids are getting involved in these things, they're probably going to get a lot of great information. They're going to get some survival skills and some tips on how to do better communication. We try to impress upon the parents that it's likely going to really help improve their relationship with their young person, so that it's a good idea for them to be involved. But the other thing is that if the young person is still in care, it can be really a joint responsibility between the foster parent to get the young person there and the social worker, who still has a responsibility for that young person's health and well-being. And you know, we just have to work together to make this happen for them.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the problems that I've heard from multiple foster parents when starting to speak out teams is that they're worried that their youth are going to say something that reflects negatively on them, that their youth are just going to bash them and talk about how awful they are as parents and different things like that. And so I find that one of the things that is reassuring for the parents is just to let them know, that there are components of the group that allow the youth to express themselves the way they feel, but that's not where the group stops, that it's all about helping them to understand both sides and to help them, have a unified family experience. Because the reason we do this is to help make sure that families are preserved. And so oftentimes when parents understand that it's not just to let them, it's not just a venting and that's it, but it's more of a helping them grow, helping them go from, that just venting stage to making differences and acknowledging the differences that are positive and things like that, that sometimes takes some of the edge off of it if your parents are having hesitations because of that reason. If it's because of transportation, we try to offer in our groups as much as possible picking up the youth, so taking that component out, because we don't want to punish the youth because of the circumstances of the world. And so, there are parents who really, they can't get off work at the times that are scheduled. And so it's not fair to the youth to say, well, if your mom can't bring you, that's too bad. And so we try to offer alternatives, and that oftentimes helps the parents too. So if you can say, okay, we'll pick them up, if you can take them home, or vice versa, those types of things can sometimes help alleviate some of the stress on the parent's side.
You also had suggested earlier, Nathan, a great solution to this, and that was to have the youth meeting at the same time as a support group or a training might be happening for parents.
Yep. Great. Let me ask a couple more questions. One is, how do you decide what ages to involve in what activities? And do you make hard and fast rules in those areas, or how do you weigh those decisions?
For the youth work that I've done, it is hard trying to distinguish the age groups because of the mental level of all of the youth and their cognitive developmental level. We find that if we have lots of youth from multiple age ranges, that it's easier, at least it's been easier for me to have two separate groups when it's talking about advocacy or different things like that, just because of, again, where they are developmentally. In the beginning, if you have less youth, it can be okay for all of them to be together. You're just going to want to make sure, and again, it can be challenging, you're going to want to make sure, though, that the level of work that you're doing is advanced enough that our older people keep coming back, but not so advanced that we lose our young people. If you're able to split that, though, I find that really that 16 up range is probably a good split, and then that kind of 15 to 13 is probably a good range. I've not had a whole lot of experience with younger than 13 wanting to do a bunch of advocacy work long term, so I don't know how effective. I don't know what effective strategies would be for that age range. But again, that 13 to 15 is probably a good group to have, and then 16 to that 18 range tends to be good when you want to separate them out.
And actually, I've had the same experience with Nathan in terms of those two groups. I have worked with younger youth, younger kids, and one of the great activities you can do with the kids that are younger than like 12 or 13 is to do life book work, or to do short topic-focused kinds of support group series. So maybe something around bullying, or maybe something around even learning how to negotiate relationships. You know, there's ways of negotiating relationships at all different ages, and I strongly believe that if we can help our kids figure that out younger, we're going to do much better. There's also some wonderful curriculum out there. One of them that I really like for elementary school age children is called Wise Up, and that's out there by Center for Adoption Support and Education. If you go to case.org, no, I think it's called, well, if you Google CASE capitalized, you will find them, and their Wise Up curriculum is a great way to get youth started, young people started.
Great, thank you. Okay, 2 more questions, unless anybody else has some to add. Is how do you help youth decide how much of their background they share? You know, particularly if you're talking about experiences that they've had, their personal, and does it vary based on whether it's a public meeting, something that's going to be published, or a smaller meeting?
I tend to operate on they share as much as they're comfortable with. It's another reason why it's really important to have that training time or that support group time before youth go and speak, so that you have an idea of what they're sharing. Generally, the way I operate is they tell the story how they want to, but if I know that there are parts, sexual abuse, things like that, that are, you know, that tend to just make people naturally uncomfortable, I might work with them on how to tell that in a way that is that fits the audience. So, well, that's a good example. For my story, you know, dealing with the death of my brothers, might give more detail for social workers or investigators because that was really important to them. But I might just, you know, say, you know, my brothers died because of neglect, because of the system failures. And so telling the same story but just in a mild way is kind of the part that you want to work on. What you want to be careful of doing, though, is saying, don't talk about this. You really want to avoid telling youth what they can and can't talk about, because that goes against telling them that they should be empowered and they should feel the need. They should feel that they can tell their story to whoever they want, to whomever they want to. So creating that crafting of the story so that they can tell the same thing in multiple ways is the way that I would go about doing that.
And I'll add a little bit to that, because I have some other things that I think about when I'm doing it. I've seen kids, I've seen young people, young adults even, that have shared more of their story than they wish that they had after the fact. So one of the things that I'll talk with young people about is, and again, Nathan's absolutely right, depends on the audience. If you're going to be in front of a large audience, we're going to have no idea who's in that audience. And I'll even say to them, think about what you want a stranger to know if you meet them out on the street about you personally. And just know that a stranger that you meet out on the street might be in that audience. So one strategy that I'll use with young people that need to talk about some really important things is to be able to let them do it in a third person. So for example, you know, if the young person's story is really focused in on some sexual abuse, for example, is one that can really trigger young people, and it also can provoke some pretty, I guess, triggering responses from the audience as well. I might help them work out their story in terms of, you know, I knew other young people in care that had this experience, or I came across some other kids who had been abused. This is what I learned from them. And so they're sharing it in the third person, even though it may be their story. The other place where I'll do a lot of help with young people is when they have a story that they need to share that is particularly angry or particularly fault-finding with foster parent, adoptive parent, social worker, or system. is to help them understand that the audience is probably going to shut down if they feel attacked. And so a good way to let people know about bad practice is to instead tell your story in terms of, here's what I wish would have happened for me. And people can read beyond, people can read between the lines about that. I agree with Nathan wholeheartedly, though. I'm never going to tell a young person what they can and cannot say. What I'm going to want to do is help them think through what's their goal and how to best get to that goal. And if it turns out that they are feeling very strongly that their story needs to be told the way that they need to tell it, then that's their right. I agree with you, Nathan.
Thank you. We have one other question, and it's it's a little bit long. I'm just going to read it as it is. The person writes, I work with a youth speaker panel that speaks at foster care and adoptive parent training. Some of the youth are open to adoption, others are not. Since we do not have enough families coming forward to adopt teens, I worry that our group is creating false hope for the teens, or that the kids reinforce in each other reasons why they are closed to adoption. What are your suggestions?
Wow. So I, on a very personal level, I don't believe that there's any such thing as false hope. I think sometimes we have to hang on to hope for people when they can't hang on to it for themselves. But I know that it's possible to find your family at age 18 or age 23 or age 40 or even age 80, because I know people that have found their family that late. I think that rather than false hope, I think that the young people that have found family really offer hope for other young people. And I think that as we are implementing some of the legislative pieces that have most recently passed with the Strengthening Families Act, and we are turning to youth age 14 and above to name folks to be on their permanency team and to be part of each one of their permanency hearings and roundtable meetings, that we're going to find that there are more and more people out there for older youth, and that in fact that they can find family. The other thing that we've seen, I think Nathan and I both have seen with the young people we've worked with together, and I know I've seen it with other young people I've worked with in the past, is that the young people are very sensitive to one another and really thoughtful and really careful about not hurting one another or not making one another feel like they've missed out on something. And so I'm guessing that the person who asked that question is being careful and cautious and caring about the youth that they're working with, which I think is fabulous. And I'm guessing that probably the youth are watching out for each other even as we're talking.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. My experience has been that when I almost prefer having groups where there are adopted people. I would rather everyone be adopted. My deep personal belief is that everyone should have a permanent family. So when I meet people who are kind of opposed to adoption for various valid reasons, my experience has been that when they get to be around others who have experienced permanency, that it helps them to understand the good sides to permanency. And so I think that for whoever asked that question, I think that you have a really awesome group dynamic right now, and I would definitely encourage you to acknowledge what Kim said, that the youth are just naturally sensitive to one another. Again, because when you come together with people who have similar stories, it's like family, and you don't want to hurt your family. But also just kind of watch as that group progresses, and I think what you'll find is that hope is definitely, as Kim said, not false hope, but sometimes the hope that these youth need so that they don't give up on the fact that permanency is an option for them, because that can affect even things later on in their lives. It can affect all aspects of their lives other than just the adoption aspect. So I don't think we ever want to snuff that out for anyone.
All right. Well, I appreciate your answers. It looks like the end of the questions. So unless you all have anything else you want to say, I'll just thank our audience today and thank you both for a great session.
Yes, thank you all for attending this. Please, if you have any additional questions or if you want additional information on the questions that were asked, please give me a call or email me. I'm, again, more than happy to answer anything and to help any way I can.
And thanks, Nathan, for including me, and thanks, Mary and audience.
All right. Thank you both. Good afternoon. Happy Halloween.